Thanks so much, Teresa. I appreciate you and the introduction and the invitation on behalf of the New Mexico Coalition to be here today and tomorrow. Thanks so much for all of you who've taken the time out today to join us. I know your lives are busy and hectic and full of lots of things that pull you in different directions. So I'm grateful that you've hopefully carved out 2.5 hours today and tomorrow to spend it here. I'm also acutely aware that doing 2.5 solid hours of one person's voice is a lot. And I will do my very best to keep it as entertaining and as engaging as possible, and as possible as it is to do at Zoom. I'd much rather be in a room with you. I'd much rather be pacing the floor with you and having conversations more face to face, but this is the space that we're in right now. So we're gonna do our best to make the most of it. So thanks so much for being here and for sharing your day with me. I'm gonna pull up my PowerPoint here. So give me just a second. I think you all can see it. Teresa, can you let me know if you can see that?
Yes, you are good to go.
Fantastic, thank you. So my name is Kim Penico. As mentioned, I work for the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and I've been doing, I've been an advocate since, how long has it been? Like 32 years, something really long, like my career's knees hurt. It's been so long. So I've been really fortunate to be able to do this for as long as I have. At the same time, I'll tell you that this is some of the most exciting work I've been able to do. I love what it's not only done for survivors, but I really also love what it's done for advocates. And although, Module 1 really will spend time talking about what is financial abuse and how to navigate that and do safety planning within that context, the remaining modules really are a financial literacy 101 in some ways. And it's okay to take information out of that for yourself. It's actually the expectation that you actually are able to take this on for yourself and make you a better advocate to sharing with others. So I hope that that is also helpful to you. I also want to recognize that we're all dealing with lots of stuff. I can tell you right now that I'm having a snow day. I live in Kansas and kids are home from school today. So I've got a 16-year-old in the room next to me, still sleeping. And I have a car in the shop that I'm thinking about and worrying about. And I've got a daughter in college that is a constant stressor on my mind. So I want to just recognize that we're all here with lots of things weighing us down and on our minds. And I would ask that you maybe find a piece of paper, and I'm going to do it myself because I am going to ask it of you. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to take my piece of paper and I'm going to write the things down that are taking my headspace today. And I'm going to put them on a piece of paper. So if you would each do that as well, that would be great. I'll put car, snow day, kid in college, all those things. And I am going to take this piece of paper. And you can put as many things that are weighing your brain down today on that piece of paper. And I want you to take the paper and I want you to fold it up and just put it to the side for just a little bit. Just a little bit. I'm not taking them away. I'm not fixing any of those problems today, but for just the next 2.5 hours, you can just put them to the side and I want you to concentrate on you and concentrate on the information we're taking in. And then when we get done, you can take those things back and then worry about addressing them later. Because they're the realities of what we're all dealing with, particularly in these very, very strange times. So I hope you feel like you can carve some time out for yourself and you find this helpful. So I also want you to recognize, and I think it's helpful to do, and we often don't do this, but where you're feeling those weights. I feel those things in my shoulders. I feel those things in my back. I feel them tossing around in my head, but just even recognize where you're feeling those things that are weighing you down. I think it could kind of be helpful to help you process them. So thank you for indulging me for that. So today we're going to talk about Module 1 and Module 2 of the Allstate Foundation Financial Literacy Curriculum. I believe Teresa sent you a link yesterday, and then I think maybe it's also going to go into the chat here to find the actual curriculum. The Allstate Foundation has invested significant amount of resources into the curriculum and into grant making to help advocates and survivors address the barriers that economics has created to getting and staying safe. So you'll find in that link, that is the participant manual link, and you can access that and you can print that off. You can also go to their website there and you can actually order hard spiral bound copies that the Allstate Foundation will send you. I strongly encourage you that if you're going to hold a support group and they come looking like this, they're really super accessible. They're really nice to have around, but they actually are given to the survivors themselves. That you know you're having a support group coming up and you're going to do this 5-part module over the next 5 or 6 support groups. Order them ahead of time. Go ahead and order more than you think you're going to need so you've got them on hand for future. They're available in Spanish, English, French, and Vietnamese. So order whatever you need, as well as also on that website is, and we can go over all of these resources at the end tomorrow. The PowerPoints that we're going to go over today that you can use. So you don't have to recreate this. You don't have to come up with anything. It's really kind of pretty canned. The biggest thing that we would just want you to spend for the next two days is really just absorbing the information and figure out what works for you and how you can best deliver this to the survivors you work with. So I want you to take just a minute. I want you to really utilize your chat on this, if you would, for me, but you or unmute yourself. I think we're a small enough group that we actually can probably unmute you and hear your voice, which would be lovely. So you don't have to just hear mine. But if you would take just a moment to reflect on your own childhood, your own upbringing, and think about, what did you learn about money and finances when you were a kid? What messages were you given, either overtly or covertly? Were those messages spoken or were they observed? But what messages, what were you taught about money and finances from your family of origin? What messages, what little quips did you learn? If somebody would share, that would be great. You can type it in the chat or you can unmute or raise your hand. What messages were you given about money and finances? Were you taught money doesn't grow on trees? Absolutely. Thanks, Anna. Not much, wasn't really spoken about. Yep. Okay. Saving was important, but nothing about how to save. We were definitely a save for a rainy day family. Excellent. Great. Was anybody told one thing and witnessed something else? We're told, if you don't have it, don't buy it. But then also we're told, don't tell dad, or, saw secret keeping, or saw one parent spend differently than the other parent, that you have to work for what you want and needs are more important. Great. Thanks, Molly. Anything else? Not much. We had to learn the hard way. Yep. I get you, Victoria. That's reality for lots of folks. Do you think any of this message that you got were specific to you because of your gender or your culture or your faith? And what were those? Sounds like somebody may be unmuted. If you want to share, go ahead. I grew up in a multi-generational family, so I think it's not always follow down the line. So I did not always follow down the line. Got it. Anybody else? How have those messages impacted you today? Somebody said maybe my faith. My mom was a faith tither. Yeah. So that was, it's clear that was important, that's where you put your money behind things and people you believe in. Father was the head of the family and dedicated and dictated what could be spent. Yep. Gotcha. After divorcing, I saw the differences in my parents' spending habits. Sometimes money was used to validate not spending time with me. Oh yeah. So it really became fraught. So money really symbolized then whether or not you got to spend time with a parent or the validation of that relationship. Yeah. So it's really intertwined. So I also want to recognize that what messages do we think survivors get from their abusive partners around their skills and abilities when it comes to money and finances? What messages do we think survivors get from their partner? Do you think their partner's like, you're so good at this? If it wasn't for you, we'd be broke. Yeah, control over finances. Yeah, totally. You don't deserve it. You can't be trusted. You're why we're always broke. You're too stupid to manage the money. This is your fault. It's your stupid kids that we always have to spend money on, right? It's my money, not our money. Yep. So the survivors, they got the same messages you and I growing up, right? Because she is me and I am her, right? So she got, don't spend it unless you got it. don't tell dad, all of the gamut of messages that we all got, because again, we're all survivors likely. But on top of then whatever sort of messages their partner gave them about money, which was typically we assume not positive, right? So I just want to point this out, and this you could probably do an entire support group about what they learned about money and what they observed around this. But I think it's important to point this out that, you know, I think so one of you talked about how tied it was post-divorce to how you got to spend time being with a parent, that is so fraught for many of us, that it brings up so many emotions. It is so important that we really spend critical time establishing trust with survivors, and that we don't try to talk about money, you know, a day or two into shelter, or that we're just, you know, sort of off the cuff saying, hey, let's talk about your budget. And there's this person is, you know, carries all this emotional baggage with them when it comes to talking about money and finances. They already believe they don't have skills and abilities around it. They've already been told they're too stupid and they're the problem, on top of whatever positive or negative messages their family of origin gave them and their community and their culture and their faith. And then we're going to talk about money. And you are the person that holds the keys to their safety for them and their kids. And so it is not, it should not be surprising that we often find survivors will say whatever they think that we want to hear when talking about money and finances, and then do something completely opposite, because that's what they've done to survive, right? They've hidden their spending, they've hidden their money, because that's how they've managed to stay alive so far, or stay safe so far. So it's so important that we have really honest conversations with people, and we unpack this and peel this back so slowly for survivors, and recognizing that for many folks, this is a very fraught subject to talk about. So I just want to spend some time making sure that we validate that for the survivors we work with. All right, so we're going to talk about what is a financially abusive relationship. But before we get too heavy into it, it's important that we really do recognize what are the elements of a healthy financial relationship. And that's where both partners have access to the financial information, although one may manage the day-to-day finances. They negotiate to form joint financial goals, although they have different values around money. Both understand and respect that decision-making is equal, although one partner may earn more income or even none at all. And both partners have access to their money without needing to ask permission or hide their spending. Large and long-term financial decisions are made jointly, and both have access to money and know where or how money is spent. So that's sort of the basics of what does a financial healthy relationship look like. But it's important that we understand that financial abuse is actually a form of domestic violence. It's not domestic violence and financial abuse. Financial abuse is actually an entire spoke of the power and control wheel, which are also probably all really familiar with. At that center is power and control, and things like use of economics, kids, male privilege, coercion, intimidation, isolation, those are all holding together power and control. And when those tactics fail is when we see things like physical and sexual violence used to hold that all together, right? So like all domestic violence, it often begins subtly and progresses over time, but it is a pattern of abusive behavior used to gain and maintain power and control within that relationship. Right? That's the definition we all probably use, or some form of that, when we talk about what is domestic violence. So let me give you an example, because we also have to contextualize, because I don't want you to, you know, if you have a friend who says something like, you know, my husband gives me an allowance every month or every week, would that maybe raise some red flags? Potentially, maybe some red flags. You tell your husband gives you an allowance. But if I say, yeah, because I overspend regularly, I got a pretty serious shopping addiction. I can't resist online Amazon. I can't resist Target. And so this is what we came up with as a way to sort of make, because we're working towards some financial goals. So this is what we came up with. That is very different than, yeah, he put me on this allowance, and I'm really struggling to get by with it, and really, you know, maybe expresses some fear around having those conversations. And that's a very different conversation. So it's important that we unpack that. We not assume all behavior is abusive, but that we have to allow the survivors to identify that, to identify whether they felt fear, whether they felt intimidation, and whether that was effective, right? So we also know that the financial abuse traps survivors often within that relationship. We often hear from survivors that I can't afford to leave, or I had to return because I couldn't pay the bills. So it's so important to understand how critical this is, really addressing finances with survivors. And we know from studies that 99% of survivors report experiencing some form of financial abuse. So what does that look like? So see, there's some of the tactics that we see survivors talk about. They steal money from them or their family, force them to give access to money and finances or accounts, make all the household or financial decisions without consulting, forbidding them from work or requiring them to work or attend or not allowing them to attend educational opportunities. We have to see sabotage a lot. So oh, you can go to work, but I'm going to keep you up all night, or I'm going to drink all night, and I'm childcare provider for the kids. So I, the survivor doesn't feel confident or good about leaving the kids with their partner who has been drinking all night and is drunk doing childcare. So just even sabotaging those things can be impactful. Things like overusing credit cards or lines of credit, refusing to pay bills or help support the family, preventing them from gaining or obtaining credit cards, even withholding physical resources such as food or clothing and medication. And again, as I mentioned, interfering with performance at work. So frequent calls, emails, texts, blowing up her phone, keeping her from even being allowed to work or go to work. And then eventually she ends up getting fired. So that really then even makes her more vulnerable to the tactics that they use. So let's talk about, now that we kind of have an understanding, what does financial abuse look like? Let's think about and unpack some financial safety planning. And so kind of think of it in a couple of different steps. So we really encourage survivors to think about their confidence regarding their own finances, pay attention to those internal voices, some of the things we've talked about, where you got those voices from, who handed them to you, and then gain information about current assets and liabilities. So start gathering information about what is my current situation. Make those scary unknowns more of a known. Figure out what they own versus what they owe. Also encourage them to take pictures of things. So this is a good time to take pictures of tax returns, take pictures of the check stubs, benefits packages that come in, anything that they need to take pictures, as well as even things such as assets. Oh, I think somebody's not muted. If everybody would just check their line and make sure they're muted.
Okay, hold on just a minute. I'm on the web.
Oh, ma'am, we can hear you on your call. Thank you. Perfect. Also, it's a good idea to take pictures of a property. So if there's assets that have value, to start taking pictures of those. Take a picture of their Harley, or take a picture of their tools or things that have high value or assets. Start taking pictures and documenting those, so they can't just disappear without them having to be accounted for, right, at a later date potentially. 3 is start thinking about saving money, putting money aside, squirreling away whatever you can, saving change from purchases, opening a separate bank account if at all possible, and divert any new income or raises or bonuses to a different account. And this is really an opportunity for you as an advocate to do what you do best, which is helping survivors really think through their lives and all the places where they may be vulnerable, but also then in this space, places where they might be able to squirrel away a little bit of money here and there. We've had survivors roll up a spare $1 and $5 bills in the bottom of the curtain hems. They've had it put them in the underneath the soles of their shoes. We had a survivor that rolled up $5 bills and put them inside the used tampon applicators and put them back in the packaging in the box, a place where he would never look. I had another survivor who worked for a mid-sized company, had access to that company's letterhead, sent herself a letter at home that said her insurance premiums were going up by $25 per paycheck. She went to HR, opened up a different savings account at a whole nother bank, went to HR and asked for $25 to start coming extra to coming out of her paycheck, and had those new funds go to this different account, and saved up money, up thousands of dollars over time to create that GoFund for her. So just being really creative about how you can start squirreling away money aside. Apps such as like Venmo and PayPal, if maybe family's sending them money or they've got a side gig where they're making extra money, have that money go to that Venmo and PayPal account and let it sit. You don't have to pull it down to an account necessarily. You can sit in your Venmo or PayPal account until you need it and then pull it off. Those also offer their own credit cards and debit cards now too. So you can get a PayPal credit card or debit card that will pull off of that the funds that you have in that account. So that's another way to think about how to hide and squirrel away money. But survivors are the best at helping us learn new tactics on how to squirrel away funds potentially. So make sure you're having those conversations. And lastly, we really encourage folks to seek financial independence by doing things like opening up a new account potentially once they get their feet under them, opening up a new credit card potentially to start building a line of credit, and consider taking at least half of any jointly held funds with them if they leave or separate. By law, this is their right if it's a jointly held account. If they actually have children in common and she's taking the children with her, to take closer to 75% is also very reasonable. It is important that any funds you take out of a jointly held account will likely have to be accounted for at a later date. So she should note where those funds were spent. Did you pay fees for school, or did you pay a medical bill or pay car payment or whatever? But make note of where those funds are spent, because you may very well be asked to account for them later. Something else to think about is how protection orders can also be used as part of that safety planning tool when it comes to money and finances. So we all know that protection orders are court orders signed by a judge or magistrate, prohibits an abusive party for threatening or stalking or harassing a victim. And so we know the orders of protection can remove an abuser from the home, ban them from workplace, and also all contact. And they're called different things in different places, a PO, protective order, an RO, a restraining order, or a PFA is what they're called here. But did you also know that orders of protection also can offer some financial relief? This is allowable in all states' protection orders. You can ask for child support. You can ask for spousal support or payment, a continuing payment of rent, or temporary possession of things is a form of economic relief. You need to say, I need this car so I can get to work, or I need clothing so I can go to work every day. You can ask for these things. Now, I fully recognize that what is allowable by law may not always be real comparable to what we're seeing happen on the bench, but it is allowable. And if you maybe start small, asking for things like possession of property, or that they not cut off utilities and things like that, may be helpful, and start establishing with the bench that when we can help survivors access money and finances, she is less likely to drop this order, because oftentimes we're hearing survivors are returning to abusive partners because they don't have access to these things. So I know judges get really frustrated sometimes because survivors will often drop orders. This is one of the things we can help provide survivors so they're less likely to do that, so they have what they need to keep those orders in place, potentially. But again, as you all know, orders of protection don't guarantee safety, and they're obviously not the right choice for everybody, but something to think through, that you can ask for those kinds of things. I also encourage you, if you've never done it before, to go check out our website. Has a great project called womenslaw.org. This is a place that advocates and survivors can ask attorneys through an email hotline questions about the law. The womenslaw.org is staffed by attorneys in both Spanish and English. And you can ask any question. They will do the research for you and get you that answer back. So check out womenslaw.org. It's a fantastic resource that we have at NNEDV. So something else I want you to keep in mind and talk with survivors about when it comes to safety planning is any new housing search. It is not uncommon that new landlords will do a credit check on potential tenants. That credit check shows up on their credit report. So if you have a survivor whose partner either has enough information about them to pose as that survivor and pull a credit report, or works in a company or organization where they would have access to that, it will show up that that this person did that Maple Hill Apartments on Elm Street did a credit check. Well, that will tell the partner where they're headed potentially. So something to keep in mind that people don't always think about. Obviously, the larger the company or property management, the more likely they are to run credit checks. So maybe small individual landlords may be less likely to run a credit check. What you can do to avoid this is you can supply your own copy of your own report. If you do a self-pull, it's actually date stamped at the top. You can tell them maybe you've had some fraud in your account or whatever, that you limit the access to that and that you can provide your own if that's possible. And if you're getting a roommate or moving with a roommate, to consider reducing the things that are in that survivor's name, such as utilities and things like that. Another thing to just consider when it comes to safety planning is technology. And I don't know if any of you have attended our tech summit that we do. It's going to be this summer. It's actually going to be in person. I think it's in June on the West Coast, but we do an annual tech summit where we talk about how technology is often misused by abusers and how survivors can think about tech safety through a little more. But there's lots of things that they can offer you there on our safety net team at our website, but some things to think through. It is important to still, Google your name, find out what's out there under your name, have the survivors do it. You may be surprised at some of the things that are on there that they didn't know about. And also you can consider setting up a news alert with like a Google alert that anytime that there's something posted with your name or address, you get notified of that. Also just thinking about workplace safety, these are recommendations we've been telling survivors for several years. I think it's really challenging that many of the folks that we work with are working in places where it's probably not safe to disclose domestic violence. It will maybe make the employer more nervous about them, so it may not even be safe to disclose. If you're working at the gas station or a job where it's hourly and it's tentative anyway, it may not be easy to say, okay, I'm not taking phone calls, or having security is not realistic. I think again it just comes down to you're an advocate, how to talk through, tell me what your workday looks like. Do you think that the potential that they may show up? What are some things you can do to ensure safety or improve safety and reduce some risks? Can you have somebody walk you out, those kinds of things, and just talk through some of those possibilities? And then let's talk a little bit about separation, divorce, and child support. So we know that many of the folks we work with are not legally married to their partners, so divorce may not be an issue, but they still may have to do things around pulling apart assets. So that may still be something that they have to think about. We all know that good legal advice is essential, and the right legal course of action is probably going to be different for everybody. But it's important to gather as much data as you can before meeting with an attorney. This is good advice for anybody. So things like past tax returns, pay stubs, employee benefits at all income, both sides, as well as a wish list that you would like to keep going forward. So that would be something to think about. The advantage to doing these things ahead of time is anytime you can save an attorney time, you are saving yourself money. And so it's a good idea to have this done as much as possible ahead of time to save some of those things going forward. I'm going to admit this person, I hope that's okay. And then before meeting with an attorney, make a list of all the possessions, put them into 3 categories: things that are mine, things that are my partner's, and things that we have held jointly or while we were married. That'll also help make some decisions about who goes where. The goal of that is to have that equitable in value. So even though she may not want access to his tools, those tools may be worth $5,000. So it just means that she should then have access to something of equitable value, or items that add up to equitable value. Not that she necessarily wants to have access to them, but that it should count. So when thinking of those things. Also, it's a good idea to determine living expenses. Go online, find out what a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment is going to cost. Find out what utilities will likely run, insurance, those kinds of things. And start coming up with a budget of what it's going to cost going forward without that extra income or living in that particular household. And don't forget about things like insurance coverage, because that's so important and so costly for so many people. But that'll also be helpful when meeting with the attorney to think about all those expenses. Particularly if they have a kid that has special or high needs, that's a unique circumstance to that relationship. And so that needs to be brought forward to the attorney to start thinking through. One of our kiddos has PT and access to special items and things like that. And maybe we need those at both houses, whatever. But those are the things that we need to make sure that the attorney knows about. And then be thinking about division of assets and liabilities. So things that are owned or owed on, who's taking what, so home and property, as well as accounts such as savings and retirements, as well as debts. So I'm sure most of you know this, but will quickly remind folks that pro se is a legal term that means you're going to appear in court on your own behalf or under your own representation, and that you are responsible for your own legal representation. Just a reminder that it may not be a great or safe choice for the survivors we work with, especially if custody of kids is at stake, and typically best suited when domestic violence is not a factor and with couples agree on conditions, which is kind of unlikely for most divorce, but particularly for the folks that we work with, this is probably not what we're going to see. We often see survivors who are willing to enter pro se end up not getting everything that they have legally coming to them because they just want it over. And while that has value, and I get that, that they often can end up shortchanging themselves and their kids in the long run. When it comes to finding an attorney, local domestic violence program, you all are probably going to be a great referral source potentially, but even the State Bar Association, as well as attorney referral services, often also can be an option. The clerk of the court typically always keeps a list of attorney referrals, as well as if you have any law schools in your community, they may be able to provide free or legal counsel, as well as, of course, our fantastic partners at Legal Aid. If there is anybody that works harder for you for worse pay, it may be your legal aid attorneys. They're overworked and underpaid, just like you guys, but they are a fantastic asset for the folks that we work with and continue to be great partners in this work. Some things to think about when paying for attorneys: most do charge by the hour, typically based on experience. And for some things that they will do flat fees, such as wills or transfer of property. However, things like divorce, and especially with custody, that is unlikely. They will likely require a retainer, which is a single upfront payment. And then once that amount is spent down, then they will be billed hourly. And that the arrangement should be written out and terms should be clear. Don't ever have a survivor assign even something with an attorney that they don't completely understand. Also really encourage folks, anytime you're doing communication with an attorney that you're paying by the hour for, do as much communication via email as you can. You'll be surprised at how much catching up and how was your day on a phone call can actually cost you by the minute. So email tends to be very succinct and often can save survivors in the long run. Just a little bit more on thinking about how to pay for an attorney. This will be, again, helpful, hopefully, to survivors you work with, but something you are likely already familiar with. Contingency fee provides an attorney for a portion of any damages that a client may get. This may be something that survivors who have considerable assets could consider, but most of the folks that we work with, this is probably not going to be something that is an option. Prepaid legal plans can be helpful, but for most divorces, they will not do full representation. They may only be able to do a consultation for free as part of the prepaid legal plan. Again, legal offices is probably going to be lots of people's best choices for finding an attorney. So just a little bit on child support. So a parent who does not have custody, or at least 51%, will more than likely have to order to pay child support to the other parent. It can be voluntary or ordered by a judge. It is meant to cover regular expenses involved in raising a kiddo. It can include medical, educational, and insurance costs. For unmarried parents, though, they will likely have to establish paternity, as it is not automatic and may have to be proven. So folks just need to remember that. And that for many of us and for many of the survivors we work with, child support can be a mixed blessing. It can actually, in some survivors' cases, actually increase their vulnerability to violence. I'm sure you have worked with survivors who said, if I go after his money, he'll hurt me. And so in those cases, we just would not encourage them to do that, and make sure that their attorneys are aware that that is not going to be a safe option. People can have, let me see here, can have their child support waived if they're working through a child support enforcement. There's two different sort of red indicators that child support enforcement can put on files. One is that they put a DV indicator on and they won't release any personal information about the petitioner or the survivor. So they won't disclose address and things like that. But then there's a second level of indicator that they actually will just not pursue child support at all, because pursuing child support will actually put her in more danger. So they can actually stop all child support pursuit if that's the case. Again, you may be eligible for child support if there's at least one child under the age of 18. In some states, it's 21, and you are the custodial parent or guardian. Child support enforcement programs are run in all states by the states. And it's important to remind folks, though, that if they receive assistance under things like TANF, Medicaid, and federally assisted foster care, child support enforcement may likely be started automatically. So not everybody understands that if I, receive these benefits, then actually child support will take over and try to recoup some of those benefits that I've been getting from the non-contributing parent. Again, if it's not safe to do so, they can put a DV indicator flag on the account or on the file, and they will not, or they will stop pursuit. So something to keep in mind. If you are receiving TANF, it's a good reminder too, that if you're receiving some sort of public assistance, and I don't know what is it called in New Mexico, but the cash assistance program there, federally is called TANF, you may be required to cooperate with things like job searching, keeping appointments and meetings. You may have to disclose your address as well as the father's identity. So something to keep in mind. However, if you are a victim of domestic violence and you've disclosed that, you can ask for the family violence option, the federal family violence option, and a waiver of good cause of those cooperations. If doing job search would put you at more risk because your batter would try to hurt you or find you, or just has made it more difficult, you can ask for waiver of those kinds of things. If it would make it more difficult to escape the violence, or if you got an unfair penalty because of domestic violence, you can have those things waived. Just a little bit, we're going to talk about disclosure and privacy challenges. And the reason we talk about this within thinking about financial safety planning is that before disclosing, it's important to think about what the possible consequences are, because the consequences may actually have a financial implication. If I disclose to my employer that I'm a victim of domestic violence, they may try to find a reason to get rid of me, which has a financial implication. And that we know that many folks and many people in our communities may actually respond with insensitivity and victim blaming. It could impact things like housing and employment and access to services. And you could lose or even reduce public assistance potentially, as well as result in referral to Child Protective Services. So it's important that we encourage survivors to consult with an advocate and know what your rights are. You may have an employer in town who is fantastic on this issue, who disclosure may be actually really beneficial to that survivor, or your public assistance office is great and does this whole wraparound services for survivors and makes it really safe for them to do so. Then of course disclosure is a good idea. But if the company doesn't have a great record about it, or you know that when they disclose, seeking food stamps or SNAP, and then they start automatic referral to CPS, then that's not a good or safe place to disclose domestic violence to, right? Excuse me. Some other things to think about is things like address confidentiality program. Teresa, do you have address confidentiality program in New Mexico?
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. So this may be a really good option for folks to use. This is where any mail going to this, the survivor applies to the program. If they are accepted, they're given an address that they use everywhere. So the address is usually a state address, Secretary of State or someplace, or the governor's office, somewhere around in there, that all of their mail will go to. And then that office will then divert it to the survivor's actual address. So this can be really helpful. And that the thing to keep in mind is that it will take longer to get mail. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm getting mail slower and slower all the time anyway. So it's something to keep in mind. It will delay mail delivery by at least 3, if not 5 days in most places. So you do want to just let folks know that mail, particularly bills and things like that, will be delayed in delivery. So something to be aware of. Also, you can block electronic access to your Social Security number. You can put a freeze with each of the 3 credit bureaus, and we'll talk more about that in Module 3 tomorrow, about how to actually block that. But you can put a freeze, you can contact Social Security and actually have a block of Social Security put on your number, so no one can file taxes under your name, no one, things like that. And they give you a PIN if you do that. So then when you get ready to file your taxes, you use the PIN to file your taxes, so that no one can do that under your Social Security number. You can also, we strongly encourage you to place new or additional passwords or authentications on your accounts. You've been asked to do a 3-point authentication, where if you get into a website or you open your bank account, I know they do this for my Apple account, that they then have to they'll send me a text message and I get a code and put that in. these are the things that we really should encourage survivors to consider doing that will reduce the risk, but we all should consider doing it, just reduce the risks and the vulnerabilities we have out there. And when possible, try to reduce the number of accounts overall in their name. Some things to think about, identity theft. There's essentially two kinds of identity theft. One is where you actually go use an existing account fraudulently. So equivalency would be somebody taking my debit card out of my wallet and going to charge up stuff at Target or Walmart, right? Or there's also application fraud. This is where somebody poses as somebody else to take out a new line of credit that the person doesn't even know about. They have the bill sent to somewhere else. They don't even know it until you don't even know until you go to apply for your own home loan, and you find out there's an account you never even knew about taken out and never paid on. So that's application fraud. Abusers often commit these types of identity theft to track as well as ruin survivors. So if they have access to their Chase account online and they see that you made a payment or they made a purchase in a city couple of cities over, I know now where you're headed or where you are potentially, as well as also taking out lines of credit under the survivor's name. So some things that you can do to reduce your vulnerabilities to these kinds of things is we know that people are digging through trash bins and pulling out personal information. Like when you get a credit card offer, make sure you're shredding that. Somebody could take that credit card offer out of the mail, out of their trash, and apply and has enough information about you, but have a new address put on it. So anything that has your date of birth, your social security number, make sure all of that's getting shredded. People are stealing money, newly issued credit cards out or pre-approved offers. Financial statements from your investments and things like that can also be a way to help to track you and take out lines of credit, as well as tax information. And we do encourage you to make sure you're pulling your credit report on a regular basis. And we'll talk about this again more tomorrow in Module 3, but they can pose as you or an employer and pull your credit report and find you that way. So that's another thing to keep in mind, as well as using the internet or paying even an information broker. And these are shockingly cheap. Buying information off the dark web is alarmingly not expensive and pretty easy to do, because for the person who's providing it, it's just a couple of keystrokes. It's easy for them. So they can access things like date of birth and information like that on the dark web. So something to be aware of and take seriously. So there are things you can do. Don't provide your social security number and address and phone number unless you absolutely have to. Your doctor, your place you go for your annual checkup does not need to have your social security number to provide you service. It is not required by law. They would like to have it. And the reason they want to have it is that if you don't pay your bill, it's easier to pursue you with a social security number. But by law, they cannot require that you provide a social security number to give you medical treatment. They don't need to have it. Now your bank will want to have some identifying information. They need to know that you are who you say you are, but and it's related to finances, but your healthcare provider does not. So be really careful about where you provide your social security number. Learn what information's out there. Make sure you're doing Google searches regularly, both on you and the survivors you work with. Limit information you share on the internet. Opt out of things automatically, or make sure you're shredding everything. Beware of any requests for personal information or phishing. Again, if you get an email from Chase or a credit card, double check, make sure everything's spelled right, that the email is actually legit. A lot of them we've had some fantastic, very convincing looking phishing come in our work email recently, and knew enough about our organization that it really did sound legitimate. So be really cautious before you provide any information, and change your passwords and PINs often. Come up with a system that is or do a password saver app. Those are free to do a password saver app on your phone, but be very cautious about that, and don't share that easily with folks, even folks that you love today, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So be very cautious about who and how you provide your PIN and passwords to. So we made it to the end. We made it to the end of module 1. It's going to get much more interesting after this, I promise. I think what we did the things we talked about, I'm guessing for those who are seasoned advocates, there was nothing earth shattering in what we talked about so far this morning. Maybe just connected some dots and maybe encourage you to think about some of these things within the context of economic justice and financial abuse. And I also want to share, I'll make sure that Teresa has this as well, but this can be something helpful to use with survivors. This is a financial safety planning guide. Help them think through who are some of the people in your life that maybe have information that can help support you? What are different accounts in your name? What are some of the assets that you have? What are the liabilities you have? And then also some things that you maybe need to take care of in the next 30 days and that you need to get pictures of and things like that. So things like pay stubs and tax returns and health insurance and start documentation to help survivors think through. So we'll make sure to make this available to you, and this will actually be on the end. There's an entire sheet that will be provided with links for you to access. Are there any questions or concerns or anything that anybody learned that they hadn't thought about before that they want to share in the chat? We've got plenty of time here. We're going to take a nice long 20-minute break here in a minute. You can unmute yourself. You can turn your camera on if you want. You can put it in the chat. Any comments? All right, well, I won't force anybody, but we are going to take a 20-minute break. I show that as we're 15 minutes past the hour. So let's come back at 35 past the hour. So everybody stand up, take a break, stretch your legs, and then we'll be back and we're going to do module 2, which is all about budgeting and how to make budgets realistic for people, how to think through budgeting, and we'll do that at the in the next round. So we'll see you all soon.